All right, welcome everybody. This is our first class on Adobe Photoshop. We decided this is our basic class, and we wanted to just start with the basics and work through the fundamentals of Photoshop. What we found is a lot of people even have been using Photoshop for a number of years, and they're just self-taught, like most of us, including myself, in the beginning. And you find that you kind of stumble through and you feel like you know it pretty well. And then as you get around people that use Photoshop more and more, you realize that you've got some holes in your learning. So I did this the other night. Those of you that were on the other night, I'm going to do this very, very quickly. I'm going to switch over quick to Photoshop and Bridge. That way you're not seeing me so much. And just in case my mouth is not syncing with the sound, it gets a little annoying. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to switch over now, and we're just going to work on a little test to kind of see where you're at in Photoshop before we begin with our initial lessons tonight on Bridge. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over, and you should be watching my screen now. So there's Photoshop up. The other night, I have this cut out, so we'll even do it faster than we did the other night. I'm going to go ahead and open these two files up inside of Photoshop. What I did is I just used my quick selection tool here, and I masked out my friend Victoria. I can turn the mask on and off so you can see she was just standing out in front of my house, and I was shooting some pictures of her daughter and saw her there and said, "Man, you look really tropical tonight," and put my ukulele in her hand and said, "Let's snap a photo while you're standing there." And so I cut her out and have used this picture a number of times for different types of marketing promos. So we're going to go ahead and put her into this image really fast. And again, here's what I want. There's nobody out there that is an expert in Photoshop. There's people that know where the tools are, and that's what makes you an expert. I even wrote this week, there's no wrong ways in Photoshop, but there is a lot of long ways in Photoshop. And the fact that I'm teaching this, all it means is I've made a lot more mistakes than you have. And so it can get really difficult, sometimes to figure out how to do things. So this again is just a little test. If you don't know what I'm doing, that's okay. The problem becomes is that a lot of people are self-taught and they've got some holes in their learning. I'm going to show you what I call the six concepts of Photoshop. I believe there's six things that you need to know to master Photoshop, and that is layers, masks, selections, blending modes, opacity, and clipping masks. Those six things, if you can understand those things, there's nothing that you can't do inside of Photoshop. So, with that being said, just watch me here. Again, this is just meant to kind of find out where you are in your learning. This is by no means how I would do this exercise. Just I want to emphasize those six values. So I'm just going to grab Victoria and I'm going to drag and drop her into this image right here. And I think I'm going to place her right about there somewhere. And again, I've got her, I selected her out with using my quick selection tool. I masked her out. She's on her own separate layer right here. I can turn the layer on and off. Couple things that are really cool inside of Photoshop CC. So if you've not moved up to CC, here's one of those things that make it really nice to move. For instance, what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on my layer and bring up my layer styles. And I'm just going to go ahead and put a inner glow. Right here's inner glow. I'm going to try to remember tonight to let you know where I'm at in certain things. I'm going to make the opacity a little bit brighter so you can see that inner glow that's happening. And you might not even know why I'm doing this. Well, if she was actually standing where it is here, this sun would be throwing a little bit of a glow around the outside edge of her. The problem is we probably wouldn't have the outside glow on this right side of her over here. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm just going to right click on my inner glow, and I'm going to say create a layer. What that's going to do is that's going to put that inner glow on its own layer, and it's going to use a clipping mask to clip it to the layer below. What does that do? Well, now I can use things like, let's undo that, select the right layer. I can put a mask on there. Now, once I have a mask on, Then I can go in here and say, well, there probably wouldn't be a glow on this right side of her because that sun's mostly there on the left-hand side. It may slightly get under her arm on that inner side there. It definitely, I don't think it's going to be on that side. It's probably not going to be on the underside of the ukulele or the underside of her arm. And I also now you could say, yeah, but that's pretty obvious that that's there. Well, true, but I still have opacity, so I can lower the opacity of that effect and maybe just put it on there a little tiny bit. So here's kind of the before and the after. So I got a little bit of a glow on her there. And then one of the other problems is they're both actually pretty warm looking photos, but I want the background and her to kind of have that same tone to them. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to do what's called a stamp visible layer. Photoshop, you need to learn how to use keyboard shortcuts. There's certain things inside of Photoshop you can only do with a keyboard shortcut. Stamp visible is one of those. And the stamp visible command is Control Alt Shift E. That's Command Option Shift E if you're on a Mac. We'll talk about Mac and PC here in a minute. And what that did is it made a layer that was made up of all these layers compressed down to one layer. Now I'm going to go up to my filter and I'm going to choose underneath blur. Again, if you just join me, I'm just giving a little test to kind of see where you're at in Photoshop. If you're not following along, well, that's okay. Then this class is for you. So, and there may be little pieces you're getting and other pieces that you're missing. So underneath blur, there's a little thing here called average. This is like a blender. I just took all those colors, put them in a blender and ground them up and came up with this one mauve looking color. It's all those colors blended into one. Now, what I'm going to do now is use something like overlay. But before I do overlay, I'm going to go ahead and put a clipping mask on that because otherwise, whatever I do would affect, don't want to hit that button, would affect all the layers below. But we don't want it to only affect Victoria, not the other layers. I'm going to set my blending mode to overlay. So we've overlaid that color onto her, and I'm just going to back it off a tiny bit. And those of you watching, if you're on Hangouts, I do have the chat line, the group chat open tonight. So if you have questions as we go, I can try my best to answer them. I'm going to introduce Dan in a minute. He can also answer some of those questions and even some of you on there. So those right there, that was just a quick little test that I want to give. I say test, but it's just a little demo to kind of see where you're at with Photoshop. Remember I told you in the beginning, there's 6 concepts. There's layers. Well, see, these are all different layers down here at the bottom. So we're using layers. Masks. These are masks. Masks are kind of like an eraser tool that you can undo and redo. Selections. These areas inside the mask and what it took to select her out of that image. You can see here's my marquee, my marching ants. I'll show you there's a selection. We have blending modes. If you look at this particular little layer here, the blending mode is set to screen. The top layer is set to overlay, so we use blending modes. And then you can see the opacity set to 55. So we use layers, mask, selections, blending modes, opacity, and whatever the other one was. So we use all 6 of those things in there. Now, if all of those things you said, man, I'm rock solid, I understood single thing he did. It doesn't matter if you agree that it was the right way or the wrong way to do it, that you just understood what was happening, then you're doing well. Dan's going to be teaching an advanced class soon. The rest of us, we're going to be starting this series that's on the Photoshop basics. So you're in the right class. All of those things will make sense over the next few weeks. They're not difficult. You master those things and everything gets really simple after the fact. So I just wanted to make sure that we did that in the beginning. It gives time for people to get on the class tonight. So with that being said, we're going to look at Photoshop. But before we start with Photoshop, I'm going to introduce Dan Mann. And I asked him tonight just to quickly talk about color spaces, color modes, RGB, sRGB, all those evil things. Those of you that have not met Dan, Dan owned a print shop for a number of years. and is still currently printing and really understands the technical side of Photoshop. I teach Photoshop year round, but Dan's my go-to guy to teach me Photoshop. So with that being said, I am going to go ahead and I'm going to turn it over to Dan for a minute, and I want him to talk a couple minutes about color spaces before we move on to our first lesson, which will be bridge. So Dan.
Hey guys, hope you're having a good time tonight. So let me share my screen real quick. I want to show you something in Photoshop. Basically, right here, I want to show how to do a proof setup. I don't know if everyone knows you can do that in Photoshop. Typically, Photoshop will default to a CMYK, which if you print anything other than with a 4-color process, like a press, then it's the wrong one for you. So you want to make sure that you switch it over to sRGB or Adobe RGB, depending on where you're printing at. So let's go over that real quick. First, I can tell you which ones are best for where. If you're going to a print shop that uses like a high-end G-Clay printer like I used to use, or still do, now my wife kind of took it over from me, you want to use Adobe RGB because it's going to more closely match your color space of that printer. Whereas if you're going to be printing at, say, Costco, hopefully not, but if you are, or say online at Miller's or Bay Photo or some of those nice online places, you want to stick with sRGB. That's going to more closely represent what their color space is. Whereas if you're going to be printing, say, business cards or flyers or invitations or something, you're going to want to stick with the CMYK. Or if you're just editing it to put it online, you're going to want to stick with the CMYK web coded or sRGB. So let's take a look at that. Right here in Photoshop, under View, you want to go to Proof Setup. And you can see on default, it's under Working CMYK. But let's say I'm going to go ahead and put this, I'm going to print it out on my printer that I have, my Epson G-Clay printer. So I'm going to go to Custom real quick. And what's nice is I can also, if I'm doing the printing, I can scroll down and find my paper down here. I don't print from this laptop, so I don't have it on here, but it's pretty nice. You can see all these different ones. They're all a little different, depends on what you're using. But just these ones on top, you can stick with their Adobe RGB. I know it says 1998, but it's still a great color space. Everyone still uses that space for a lot of high-end printing and image viewing. You also have the sRGB here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the sRGB, and you'll see I can click Preview on and off. And if you look at the blacks, you can see that the CMYK was showing it pretty light. So say I was going to print to a CMYK printer, I would have wanted to kind of crush my blacks a little bit to make those come out darker. Whereas if I'm showing it on an sRGB printer, those blacks may already be exactly where I want them. If I were to send over a crushed black file, then my blacks would be too black when it came back from the printer. So you got to look out for those things. Now in this specific image, it's really just the blacks that are changing, but you got to be careful because lots of times it's going to be your skin tones, and so that can really get you in trouble if you're not watching that. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. You can also see up top under View, right here you can have it proof colors, and you can turn that on or off. And that's just going to show you between your proof setup, your custom, or you can keep it on defaulted CMYK, or you can default it to Adobe RGB, depending on what you use the most. And then, so you can turn that on and off so you get an idea of what colors shift for you. Now, if you don't know what your actual image is, you can go down to Edit, Color Settings, and just see where you're at. Right now I have my working space as sRGB, but I can switch that over to Adobe RGB right here. And so that's actually going to make it to where my working space is still going to show me that Adobe RGB instead of the sRGB. But you want to make sure those are all linked up and that they're the same. So there's a couple of different places that you have to check while you're editing. Also, you can also assign a profile to the specific document. So this camera was shot using the Adobe RGB, but if I wanted to switch it over to a profile and then switch it to sRGB, there's a big difference right there. You can see if I was to send this file, since they don't have my proof set up, if I'm going to send this file over and have, say, Miller's print it, it's going to come back a little muted and a little less saturated than you would think. So you want to make sure that you set it to sRGB before you do any of your color adjustments. That way, what you get back is going to more closely represent what you want it to look like. So, anyways, without going into great detail on what color spaces are and what they look like, we don't really have a good way of showing it other than there are a few things out there you can take a look. And Adobe says that their color space is, shifts over this way or that way, but Adobe definitely has the most colors, whereas CMYK is very few colors. So there's also ProPhoto. Sorry, ProPhoto is one that is a good default to have all your images on because it's going to have the most colors available. And then when you go to send it to the printer, then you can convert it to either Adobe RGB or sRGB. So that's it for now. Do you have any comments, Mark?
Yeah, am I back on? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, I'm back on here. So here's what we're going to do. Just really quickly, in a nutshell, one of the things I always like to tell everybody when they're looking at, what color space should they be working in, just think of it this way. Think of sRGB. Well, it stands for Superior RGB, and it was developed by Microsoft. That's not who I think of when I think of Superior. Think of that as the small box of crayons. Remember the little box of crayons that had 16 colors in it? Well, think of Adobe RGB as that big giant box that had the sharpener in the back. Well, sRGB has about 16 million colors. Adobe RGB has something like 32.5 million, over 30 million colors. So you've got quite a bit more colors to choose from. But like Dan said, it gets confusing because it really has to do with your monitor and where you're going to get it printed. If you go ahead and say, yeah, I want to work in that Adobe color space, make sure your monitor is set for Adobe RGB. With that being said, if you're an Apple person, you should be working in Apple RGB because your monitors are set for a different color space. It's that way you're seeing what your monitor is capable of seeing. So I just want to throw that in
there. Definitely.
So let's start looking at Bridge. Why Bridge? Because Bridge is what I believe just brings everything together. Most of us are using more than one Adobe product. We're using InDesign, Illustrator, Acrobat, all kinds of different products. Maybe Photoshop's the only one you're using. Even if it's the only one you're using, it's still worth taking a look at Bridge. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I have a folder here called Hangouts. There we go, and it's got Bridge there. When we're looking for files, when we want to work with something, have you ever inside of Photoshop went to open a file and you said open, and it opened up and you started going, I don't know if it's this one or this one or this one. It's because of these files, you can't get a preview of it. Or if it was a raw file, you don't even see the raw file because Photoshop cannot read raw files, but Bridge can. So I'm going to bring up Bridge here. And if you're on a Mac, you're going to go to your Finder. If you're on Windows, normally you go to your Windows Explorer and you start looking for files. So I'm going to open up that Bridge folder that I have inside of Bridge open also. And if I look at it in my Explorer panel, here's what I'm going to see: a bunch of icons. Well, that doesn't tell me anything, the names of these different files. Well, some of you are saying, yeah, that's because you need to change your view to something like large icons. Well, now I can see some of them, but it's doing a better job. I can see some of my raw files. Some of my raw files I can't. If I wanted to work on a Acrobat file on a PDF, I can't see what's inside those PDFs. Can I watch videos? Is that the clip I want? I don't know. I'll spend so much time looking for files if I don't have Bridge available to me. So the first thing that Bridge is, it is a file finder on steroids. Bridge, number one, it just sees the files that are on your computer. The cool thing is, which is where I've had a trouble with Lightroom, is based around collections. And what that means is they're virtual collections. And my problem is I use lots of external drives that get changed a lot. So what happens inside of Lightroom for me is one day the pictures might be on the H drive, and the next time I go to use them, now that drive's called the G drive because a different drive's the H drive. And now Lightroom tells me it can't find my pictures. And then I have to go tell it, well, now that's because it's changed. I don't have that problem inside of Bridge. Whatever is plugged into my computer, Bridge just reads it. So it's an amazing way to see things. I'm going to open up, here we go, Bridge. This is that same exact file that we were looking at in my Windows Explorer. But rather than go, what are on these? See, now I can actually click on them and see what's inside them. So it allows me to see everything inside. Down at the very bottom, if you look down at the bottom right-hand corner down here, I have a little slider bar, and that changes the size of my thumbnails. That way I don't have to get my reading glasses out to see what's going on. And everything inside of every Adobe product now, all their panels are all customizable, and all of your slider bars. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this over so that I want to see my preview over here, but I want to see my preview a whole bunch bigger. I don't want to look at a tiny thumbnail, and maybe I want 3 thumbnails across. So I can set it up how I like to use it. When you first open up Photoshop or a Bridge for the first time, I'm going to reset that workspace. It's going to look just like this. These are the essential tools that Adobe says you need when you're using Bridge. They do have all the right tools. The problem for me is they're just not in the right place for me. So again, I just move them around how I like. Once I get them how I like them, then I'm going to use the little drop-down menu right up here next to folders, and I'm going to say a new workspace, and then I can call it something like Night Space. When I say enter, now it's listed in my workspaces. So if I'm working along, let's reset this here, to reset the workspace, and somehow I lose something gets moved, I can always just jump to how I like to work with it. See, I have one set right here. This is how I normally work with my Bridge. Essentials, again, it's basically essentials. I've just moved some things around. So that's just how you customize your workspaces. You'll notice off here on the left-hand side, I have some quick links here, like it says pictures, takes me quickly to the pictures. Tonight, we're going to go back and forth a lot, and I'm going to use this Hangouts folder. So I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to drag it over to this Favorites tab, and it's going to now be a hot link. So whenever I need to find something, I'll just click on Hangout, and there I'll be. I'll be back to that file. Maybe this Bridge folder right here. Let's drag that down there also. So see, you can make these quick folders so you're not having to go back inside your files up top here and figure out where you were at. I can just jump around really quickly into those particular files. So that's a couple ways that you can make favorites buttons. You can look at, there's some other things like the film strip view. If I go to my film strip view, well, that gives me a little film strip down here, and then I can see very large versions of them. Film strip allows you a couple other extra features that you might not know about. If I select 2 images, well, I can click on these faces here. I'll put this like right here on her teeth, and I can click on here, and I can zoom in on this. If I hold down my control button or command button on a Mac, then I can move one of these and they'll both move around together, kind of lock simultaneously. Sometimes we have 2 versions of an image and you want to see which version's better close up. I can do that. I can click on them and take those away. So there's a couple little things that you can do right there. I can also at any time, all I have to do is hit my space bar and it becomes full screen. Then I can use my arrow keys to tab through those pictures, hit the space bar again, I go right back into Bridge. So a lot of times those little icons, even this preview is a little bit too small for us, and we start saying, I want to see that bigger, hit that space bar. Yep, that's the picture I want. I can hit the space bar again and get out of there. So that's just some of the things that you can do as far as just looking at photos. Let's go ahead and let's move into our Bridge folder here. I'm going to move back to my workspace so I can see it here. I use Bridge all the time. When I'm shooting portrait sessions, when I'm shooting weddings, Bridge is my best friend. When I get done with a session, I can either import, I have an import feature inside of Bridge up here where it says tools. We're not going to really look at that tonight too much, actually, because I never use it. And I can actually import right into Bridge, and it gives me a chance to rename them at that time. But I just, like you do probably, I drop them into my computer. I go into Bridge. I find that folder. Here's just some friends that I shot their some pre-engagement or their wedding announcement photos the other day. So in here I have 240 pictures, it says. And it's loading up some of the previews right now. But now inside of Bridge, I can kind of thumb through these. I can click on them individually. I can use my arrow keys and I can arrow through them and look at them, but that's not how I use Bridge. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select the first image, and this is a keyboard shortcut you should already know. It's universal for all programs, and that is Control A. That means select all. Control A or Command A on a Mac. And that gives you all of those images selected. I want to view these images. I'm using these words carefully because this is how I've taught myself to use the different Adobe products. I want to view them. So I'm going to go up to my bar up top here and see it says File, Edit, View. So this is so you know where to find it. I want to view it. It says Review Mode. And notice right here, Control B. This is a command. This is a keyboard shortcut that I've memorized because I use this all the time. When I click on Control B, what's going to happen is think of this as like an old-fashioned, well, now it's old-fashioned, carousel from a slide projector. Well, notice down on the bottom right or bottom left corner, I have these arrow keys, the right arrow, left arrow, and I have a down arrow. Well, I'm not going to click on these. I'm just going to use the arrow keys on my keyboard. And now I can look and say, okay, these are just, we were starting out and we really didn't quite know what we were doing, testing the light out. And I don't like this at all. So I'm going to hit my down arrow. And what this does is it doesn't delete the image, it deselects the image. So maybe I bounce back and forth and go, do I like that one better than that one? Yeah, let's get rid of that one. That one's too similar. I don't like her hand up there. It looks a little too rigid. The hands look weird there. Getting a little bit better. I can kind of bounce back and forth. Choose the ones I like, the ones I don't like. I'm just going to now go quickly, and I'm going to delete a bunch of them. Now, I shouldn't say delete them. I'm going to deselect a bunch of them. It's funny, all the things we get involved with when we shoot portraits. They had 2 pet goats and a pet potbelly pig and a new puppy that they wanted included in their photo shoot. So that's always fun. Moved over to some barns. They're outdoor people. And I am just very quickly, if you could see me right now, I'm just hitting my arrow keys really quickly, some up, some across, some down. I just want to get through this whole thing, these 240 images. I'd spend a lot of time, the ones that I like, the ones I don't like, keeping and getting rid of some. And that way, when I'm all the way through them, now I can say, okay, I'm done. I've looked through all these images. Let's get rid of all these things. There we go. I went all the way around. Just like anything that's in full screen mode, you're watching Netflix and you're in full screen. What do? You hit the escape key. Now notice, only the ones that I didn't hit the down arrow for, they are still selected. I have the ones that I like selected. The ones I don't really like are deselected. So what am I going to do at this point now that I have them selected? Well, here's now what we're going to talk about really quickly is I want to label these different images. If you look up top here, it says label. And if I click down the drop-down menu, if I were to hit Control 1, then that's going to give it a 1 star. Control 2, 2 stars, and so on, up to Control 5. I can also label these with a color. It says it's review, approve, second, select. This will just colorize those. Here's how I use it. You can use it however you want. The first time that I go through a photographic session, I will pick the ones quickly that I like, and I'll give those a 3-star rating. So let's click off of those. So now I only have one image selected, but I had all those other ones selected as 3 stars. Well, it's time to cull those down because I need to work on them. Notice up here, top right, I have this little star. I can say filter those and only show me 3 stars or more. And all the rest of them disappear. And now it says I only have 72 items. That's a lot easier to work with than 240 items. So now I've hidden a bunch. I've got those. I might go through here again and go Control A, select all, and then remember it was view, review mode, Control B, loads them up, and I might go through these. Here's some things that you can do while you're actually in this program. You find an image and you say, yeah, I really like that one. I can go Control 4, or I can click on the little stars down here. No, I can't. Control 4. I don't want to hit Control 4 because I'm running a program called Zoom It. And if I click Control 4 right now, it's going to zoom in and mess everything up. So sometimes you get conflicting software like I have now. I also have the ability to use my bracket keys. Those are those squared off parentheses. If I hit the right one, I'm going to rotate that image. And basically, I am actually rotating that image. When I get out of Bridge, if I bring this up in any other program, it's going to be rotated on its side. So sometimes we just, our auto rotate doesn't work and we get an image, or if somebody gives you an image that doesn't have that feature built into the camera, and it brings it in, you can rotate them right here. I've had to do that a few times lately, so I can quickly do different things like that. Remember, I can drop the ones I don't like out by hitting my down arrow. I can also hit my delete key right now, and it will delete that image. That image will be gone off of my computer, so just be aware of that. I'm going to hit escape. So that's like the first time that I go through it. I go through it a second time, and I might pick out the ones I really like and give those 4 stars. And those are the ones that I end up, you know, the 30 or 40 that I show the client, that I say, hey, we need to get this down. And then I let them go through it with me. And then they pick out the 15 or 20 that we've agreed on to say, these are the ones that I want, that you want me to work on, that you want me to edit for you and get ready for print. Then I'll give those a 5-star. So now, 2 weeks later, maybe I'm really busy and I finally get to those images. I don't have to go, oh no, I don't remember the ones they really liked. Well, all I have to do is say, show me the 5-star or more, show me the 4-star or more. So right now I'm going to clear that filter. See the star ratings, they don't go away. It just turned that filtering system off. So really helps, especially things like weddings and portrait sessions. Every time I do something that I'm going to show you tonight that I'm adding onto a file, like a star rating, as soon as I gave it a rating, what it did, it added to this file what's called an XMP file. They also call it a sidecar file. And the reason they call it a sidecar file is because it's this little tiny, like a little text file that gets attached to the image. And that way, all of that extra information is inside that. They call it a sidecar because it moves with it and you don't have to even tell it to move with it. So if I were to copy this image on a thumb drive to work on another computer, that XMP file goes with it. I can delete that XMP file in Finder or in Windows Explorer. But if I do things like my keywords, my star ratings, if I were using this particular image is a raw file, my raw settings that I used, if I were to open it up already, those would be deleted as well. So you can delete those and they can be changed. We'll get into raw files at another night, but that's an XMP file. I showed you the review mode. Couple things that you can do inside of there. The other thing is down below here, filters. This isn't probably when I would use this. I might use this. I use this quite a bit like a wedding. A lot of us have to do things like wedding albums. You ever worked with a wedding album and you said, oh my goodness, I need some horizontal pictures to go into this album, but I have 1,800 photos to look at. But it can't be a vertical because it's not going to fit in the wedding album. Down here on our left, it says filter. If I click on that filter, I have a bunch of different other ways to filter images. Look at this one, orientation. I can say, just show me the landscape photos. So now all it's going to show me is the horizontal photos. I can click that off and say, you know what, this needs to fit in and it needs to be a portrait. I can go in here and I can tell it by keywords, which we haven't talked about. I can say things like focal length. Show me just pictures that were taken at 125 millimeter. Show me the ones that were taken at 200 millimeter. I can choose different camera raw settings. Tell me what white balance was used. If I used flash, different things like that. And depending on what's available is going to depend on what filters you have. So there's lots of ways to filter, and it's just depending on what's inside that collection. There's only one camera used, but if I use 2 or 3 cameras, like ends up being done at a wedding, I can actually say, hey, only show the ones that were shot on a Canon 5D. Show me just the pictures that were taken on the Sony A7. Because a lot of times we end up renaming our files and we need to find it based on what camera was used. So there's some other ways that you can filter. Really quickly, one last little thing here. I'm going to show you metadata. We all know what metadata is. That's that information that is embedded into our file. It tells us when the file was created. It tells us what lens was used, what was the actual focal length, what our metering mode was, all kinds of neat stuff in there. It tells you what camera was used. If it was video, it's going to tell you the frame rates. Metadata, a lot of people only equate it to photographs, but if you use other Adobe products, I use InDesign quite a bit. I've had to open up things like InDesign or Illustrator to see a project that I've worked on just so I could see what font I use. Those fonts are found in the metadata, so I can find it. Anything inside the metadata that has this little tiny pencil, if you look over to the far right here, that means that I can edit that. The original date, it tells me I can fix that in case maybe my camera was off. You can see there's different things GPS-wise. I can edit if I know the GPS settings. There's just different, all kinds of neat little things that you can add. See this? Who created it, the address, the city. Your information can be put right into that metadata. Makes it much more difficult for somebody to claim that image as their own. This metadata is one of the ways they catch pirated pictures all the time, is through metadata. It'll tell me if it's been opened up in Photoshop, all kinds of things. Keywords. This is a great thing to get used to doing, especially if you work with the same types of people over and over again. They're already going to give you, I reset everything tonight so that you could see and cleared out a lot of settings. So you could see this kind of in the raw format. But keywords, this is an event. We'll say engagement. Well, my only choices are birthday, graduation, wedding. No, it's not. I'm going to right click and I'm going to say new sub keyword. And let's call this engagement. I hate to spell things live because I know there's English teachers watching. So I'm going to use the keyword engagement. And these people, I am going to say, his name's Gavin. So we're just going to put Gavin's name there and we're going to click on that. And this was taken in Palo Cedro. So I'm going to click on that. Why do I need to put these things? Well, if you're like me, you take lots and lots of pictures and it gets very difficult to find things. Do you know what the #1 stock image in the world is? I'll tell you, it's sunflowers. You know what happens every time I see sunflowers on the side of the road? I am turning the wheel, I'm pulling over, and I'm taking pictures of those sunflowers. Every picture look good? No. You can take 20 pictures of a sunflower and maybe one of them looks really good. But the problem is, I said, I'm driving and I pull over. I'm heading to my nephew Ryland's birthday. I see sunflowers, I pull over, I take the pictures, I go to the birthday party, I come home, I download the photos. Where do those end up? They don't end up half in a folder called Ryland's birthday and a half of them go into a folder called flowers. No, they all go into a folder called March 17th, 2015. And it might even say Ryland's birthday or Ryland's 12th birthday or something to that effect. I am never going to remember that that's where those sunflowers are. But if I go and I keyword the really good ones, well, let's go all the way back to the root of my directory here. So I'm looking at the C drive right up here. All I have to do now is I can plug in a hard drive. I can come over to my top right and type in sunflowers, but we know we put Gavin in there. So I do that and I hit enter. This is going to search my C drive and it's going to look for any picture that is keyworded with Gavin, including any folder, any file name. So maybe that was a little bit more difficult. Let's go and say engagement. See if I spelt that right. There we go. So there's that one photo right there. So they could have been in multiple files, sunflowers, and it would have pulled them all up and it would have populated them there because maybe I needed a sunflower to work on something for a client. So keywords are going to help you get around rather quickly inside of there. You also, let's go backwards here. Let's go use our quick links here back to Bridge. Notice I am looking at everything that's in this Bridge folder. You notice I can do some things I didn't show you. Things like video. Let's move this down. Because it's got so much going on here, I got to let my Bridge catch up. There we go. Let's pull this down here. I can actually watch a video clip inside of Bridge. We'll turn that off. I don't have to bring up some sort of other program to watch the video clips. I do a lot of video editing. I can see that. Maybe I'm working on a PDF. Here's one neat thing that I can do with that PDF. You notice when I bring the PDF, you'll see down below at the bottom here, it says this is page 1 of 8. If I click on here, then I can quickly go to, there we go, page 2, page 3. I don't have to bring up Acrobat or Adobe Reader to look and see if these are the ones that I'm looking for to work on. So I actually can see them right there. I can look at Illustrator files. I can look at TIFF files. This is an InDesign file. Here's a PSD, PDFs, another big PDF or PSD. These are RAW files. These are RAW files out of my Sony. There's all kinds of just different things. You get to see everything. So here's a PNG file. I get to see all this stuff. But not only are these available to be seen, but I have this folder. This is a subfolder. If I want to see what's in the subfolder and what's in this folder, I can right up here where it says Bridge, little arrow, click on it and say, show me the items that are also in the subfolders. So now it's going to show me all of the pictures that are in the subfolder and all the pictures that are in that folder. So now I can see everything if I need to. And then all I have to do is come back up here and click on the folder I want, and all of the subfolder items are hidden out of view. So there's some really cool things that we can do right there. Many times, if you're like me, I'm going to go to pictures here. Some of you that know me know that I just took a trip with one of our photo friends over to the Sierras. And anytime that I'm out taking landscape photos, I'm constantly looking for textures to put on things. So we went up to a place inside of Death Valley that is called the Mosaic Canyon. And while we're inside the Mosaic Canyon, we were finding this really cool kind of pinkish marble. I know it doesn't look very pinkish to you right there. But anytime that I find cool textures, I want to save those somewhere, but I don't know what folder they're going to be in. So here's one thing that I can do. Maybe I select this one. See how great this looks? This is a little tip that Boris, who I went to Death Valley with, we learned this from one of our photo friends. Big shout out to you, Truman Holtzclaw, said, hey, when you go to Death Valley, carry a squirt bottle. We didn't have a squirt bottle. We carried an extra bottle of water, and we used our mouths as a squirt bottle and got some water on the rocks so those colors really snap. It was a lot of fun to watch people's eyes when they were going, why are those guys spitting on the side of the mountain? Well, let's say I've selected these 3 items that I really like as far as textures go. Over here on my left side, I have what's called collections. I have a collections called clouds. At the very bottom, I have a little button here that says new collection. Include these ones. Yes, I want to include those into it. And I want to call it textures. Now, I can keep adding new photos to this collection. They're not copies, they're virtual collections. So if you've been using things like Lightroom works on collections, so you should be very familiar with it. Let's go here and let's look in a totally different folder. And maybe I come in here and say, ooh, that'll be a nice texture. There we go, this one right here. All I have to do is click, drag it down to the file I want it to go in and let it go. And now at any point, I'm working on a project and I go, boy, where did I put all those textures? I know it's in like 30 different folders. All I have to go to my collection and say, oh, there they are. For instance, clouds. I am constantly going, ooh, ugly blue sky. I need clouds. And I need clouds middle of day. So I've got all kinds of clouds for middle of day over the different years, the ones I really like. Different color sunsets, storm clouds, whatever kind of thing that I need, they're available to me. So use this to your advantages. Make these collections so that you have things that you can use. I showed you the filter, showed you the metadata keyword. Let's go back to our Gavin and Selena. Guess what? Underscore DSC 4846.nef means nothing to me. More than likely, as many pictures as I shoot, in a month or two, I'm going to have a file named that exact same file. And it might cause some problems because I'm going to have duplications of names. I want to rename these files. Well, Bridge makes it really easy to do that. I'm going to click on one, remember Control A to select them all. And I can come up here where it says Tools. And I'm going to say, right, the very first tool is Batch Rename. And it says, what do you want to do? Well, I want to rename them in the same folder. I just want to rename these. It says, here's what the current file name is. Well, I want to call this Gavin. I'm going to use an underscore and say Selena. And I'm going to put an underscore again so my numbers, see if you notice down here, don't run together. I want the first number to be 1, and I don't need 4 digits. I know I have 73, maybe I'll have 100, so I'm going to say 3 digits. So see it, my new file name is going to be Gavin Selena 001, and the next one 002, and I'm going to say rename, and they're going to be done. If you work on a server, and maybe you're someone who does a lot of weddings, and you go, yeah, I use InDesign a lot, and the problem is that my InDesign files are tied to that file name. Well, I can click here and say, preserve the current file name in the XMP, that sidecar file, so that my computer can still find it. I can still search it by the old file name if I need to find it. So that is available to you. Just wanted to show that. I'm going to hit rename and watch what happens. Just that quickly, it says I'm renaming the files, and now I've renamed those files. I have physically renamed those files. So if I were to go to my Windows Explorer, if you went to your Finder, you would see that they are named this new name. So be careful when you name them, rename them, you have physically renamed them. Kind of hard to undo it. You can undo the add to collection, but you can't undo the rename. So just be aware of that. A couple other things that are available to you. There's other things that it does. Oh, here's the get photos. Remember I was looking earlier. It made it into a button for us. Yes.
Just let me, I just want to say, it's imperative that you do that, do the rename before you show your clients. Because otherwise, file name, and they wonder what happened to 5 images before the one and the next. And so you don't want them seeing those, because then they're going to ask where they are. And you got to show them to them. They're going to realize, well, you got 5 images that I don't really like, or hey, this one might look better, or they're going to start nitpicking things. So I think it's a really good idea to do that. So I just wanted to put it out there.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, and it's exactly, I actually had this problem not too long ago where I didn't name them soon enough. And then what happened is I use Dropbox a lot of times to show things to my clients. And then they go by the file name or where they're at in Dropbox. And they say, we like number 28 and number 47. And then I'm trying to figure out which is 28 and which is 47. But when I rename them this way, I never have them have a problem. They go, we like 006 and we like 012, and it makes it much easier for me. And like Dan said, what happens is people are smart enough now to read your files and go, well, what happened to 4845 through 4857? Where did those all go? When they just see them in a row, they say, oh, those are the images. One of the worst things you can do is show too many images to a client. I've done it, and I'm sure you've done it too. And you'll be sorry when you show them 240 items. You've just made your life much more difficult than you need it to be. Up top here, you'll notice right up here, this little button, it says, this is my recent files button. I actually can quickly say, what files did I last work in Illustrator? The last ones that I worked in InDesign, because sometimes I don't remember where they're at, or the last photos that I worked inside of Photoshop. But also then I have recent folders to go to. So you can go, man, 2 days ago I was working in that Sierra's Winter folder. Instead of having to find it, I can just click on it there. So this is really nice for finding your work quickly. Again, Bridge is just made to make life easier for you. Let's go backwards here. Let's go to our Hangouts folder, and let's say this is one last little feature that I want to show you. Let's say we were going to build like that composite we did earlier, and let's say we were going to put Victoria in this background, and then we're going to put her little daughter in there with her as well, and then maybe we were going to advertise the workshops, and so we needed this picture of Krista in there as well. And these are all going to be made into one document. So here's what I do is that I say Tools, Photoshop, and then I say load these files into Photoshop layers. So if I click on that, what's going to happen is Photoshop's going to open up, and it's going to start open up these images, and it's going to load them all as their own layer into one document. Oop, I got to let it all finish here. There we go. And based on which is the widest and what's the tallest, that's how big the entire image is going to be. So you can see some images are little tiny ones, but it gives us a workspace that's huge. We're not having to always add more canvas to work. And now I can upsize and shrink these, whatever I need to do with them loaded. And what's also really neat is it names the layers, not layer 1, 2, 3, 4. It names the layer the name of the actual file. So we can still, it's done some of the work for us. So those are my favorite features inside of Adobe Bridge. I'm sure that some of you are going, "Oh, you missed this one thing. This is what I really like about it." I want to hear that. I want you to tell me, what it is that you're using it for. So hopefully that ought to have given you enough stuff to go, man, I need to stop hunting and pecking for pictures. I need to start using Bridge. Bridge makes life so much easier for you. Um, get out there and play. We tell everybody, you know what? Photoshop, it's just Xbox for grown-ups. You should be playing with Photoshop every chance you get, because a lot of us, your work, it either makes or breaks you how well you can do Photoshop. And it's not a matter of one's right and one's wrong. We all have our own style. You'll never find your own style if you don't actually work it and try to use it. That's why I threw these funny pictures. Some of you that follow me on Facebook know I have no hair. And the other day I was playing around with what I'd look like with hair, like being young again. So I played around and tried to fool friends on Facebook. I didn't fool anybody. But these are those fun things that you do. Why did I do that? Because I had watched a tutorial on blending in things and how to make things look correct. And so I just grabbed a picture of myself. You can never say, yeah, you always have people to shoot. No, I don't. Shoot a picture of yourself and make it and see what you can do. You need to play with Photoshop, because if you don't play with Photoshop, what'll happen is when you get behind and you have a bunch of work that needs to get done, a wedding that needs to get edited, you're going to fall back on your bad habits when it comes to Photoshop. And again, there's no wrong way in Photoshop, but there's lots and lots of long ways. Don't be working the long way with everything. So this was Bridge tonight. We're going to move on to a couple other things. Next week, we'll start looking at Photoshop. We're going to start working through the toolbar and showing you what all the tools do. We will start with layers and masks so we understand those key concepts probably next. Before we go, because we just have a couple minutes here, Dan, was there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, actually, there is. I'm also really excited to show people some Camera Raw, and just to let people know that Bridge came first. I know Lightroom is pretty awesome, but all Lightroom really is Bridge with Raw all in one program. And so using Bridge and Camera Raw is a little more comfortable for a lot of people, because it's very similar to the file explorer that they're used to using Windows or even the Mac, versus the Lightroom's kind of confusing, especially when it comes to outputting. And some people don't know this, but on Camera Raw you can actually save your file as a DNG as well. So you're not limited in that aspect. It has about 99% of what Lightroom has. So, but there's one other thing I want to show you. I want to show the color spaces real quick. So if you guys want to look at my Photoshop here, this is just kind of representing it. This is not exact. This is just something that kind of visible spectrum is what the human eye can see. The wide gamut would be a little bit closer to, say, maybe Pro Photo or Pro RGB, whereas Adobe RGB you can see is quite a bit larger than sRGB and even larger than CMYK. So, but also you can see how they're kind of. What was that?
We're not seeing that.
You're not seeing that?
I think you need to lock your. You have floating tabs probably.
All right, here we go.
It's totally blank.
How about now?
No, we're not seeing it. It just says color space is JPEG.
Nice.
I think what you have to do is underneath Windows, you have to select consolidate, or not consolidate to tab, I believe.
I'll just do it this way. All right.
I see it.
All right, so here, again, we have the visible spectrum here. We have the wide gamut, which again was more close. Well, actually, it shows it being huge, which really there's no color space available yet that has all that. But I would say Pro RGB is probably close to that. Then you have your Adobe RGB. And here in this gray section, you can see how much larger it is than the sRGB and the CMYK. But I also want to show you that not only is it larger, but it's shifted a little bit. So while this isn't very accurate, you can see that maybe the Adobe RGB has better greens and has, you know, more into the violets, whereas the CMYK is lacking in the violets, but it might have a little better yellows than the sRGB. So, you know, especially between the sRGB and the Adobe RGB, just, you know, get an idea of what you're, you know, what's available as far as those colors go. You can see the greens are really lacking in the sRGB. So if you think about it, if you take your print and you want to print it at, say, Miller's, and say you're getting in 12 by 18 that you're going to frame, and it's a landscape photo of Moss Spray Falls, something with a lot of green in it, that print's not going to look as good as if you brought it to someone who's printing on like an Epson 9900 or one of those higher end Giclée printers. That's going to give you a much better variance between your greens and your yellows. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Good. Yeah, that was good. Ooh, that gives us a nice visual of what's going on inside there. So those of you that are still hanging around, I'm going to show one thing real fast because you know, we're still just a couple minutes over, and it doesn't really fit anywhere that we talk about this. So I'm going to go ahead and show this. A lot of people don't know the difference between a vector and a raster. This is one of those things that I hear all the time is that they don't quite know. Everybody says, yeah, I kind of know. Well, kind of knowing isn't the same as knowing. And you ever been working on an image and you go to use maybe one of your filters and you see the little box that pops up that says, okay, if you want to do this, you have to rasterize it first. And you kind of go, yeah, rasterize it. Sure, whatever. I want it done. So go rasterize away. We don't quite know what's going on. Let me explain to you just very quickly the difference between a vector and a raster. And it's so important. Photoshop effectively could have been called Raster Shop because it is a raster program. Illustrator is a vector program. So what's the difference between the two? I made these two little logos, identical logos here, and this bottom one is my vector, something I normally would work in Illustrator with, but yes, I can work with it in Photoshop. And then up top is my raster image. Think of it this way. Both rasters and vectors are pixels, but think of a raster image as pixels and think of a vector image as math. What do I mean by that? A raster image, what happens is when we take a 12 megabit picture, effectively what it means is that our picture is made up of 12 million tiny little pixels. Every one of those pixels are assigned 3 values. Hue, which is what color is it, saturation, how much of that color, and luminance, how light and how dark the pixel is. So in theory, every single one of those pixels could be different from one another. Your picture could be made up of 12 million tiny dots and not one of them are identical. That's how we get things to look photorealistic. So what happens is when we get to a spot like where blue is becoming green here, it isn't just blue and then green. No, what happens is we have blue, then we have a darker blue, then we have a muddy blue, and then kind of a greenish blue, and a little bit of a dark green, lighter green, a pale green, and then the green we want. So it's really taking like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It takes like 8 pixels to make that transition from blue to green. Not a problem. That things look good. The problem is when we go to scale up an image, Well, if I wanted to make this 10 times bigger, well, guess what? How many pixels is it going to take to make that gradient between blue and green? It's going to probably take something like 80 pixels now to do that. So 80 pixels don't exist, only 8. So Photoshop has to do what's called interpolation. It has to create pixels that don't exist. And that's why it tries to make it look good for you. That's why someone says, "Oh, get my logo offline. I'll just go to our website and get it." You ever pulled something off their website and it looks really good? It's like 4 inches square on your screen, and you drop and drag it into a document, and it just goes boop, and it turns tiny on you. And then you try to make it bigger, and it looks like a pixelated mess. Well, that's because it was a raster image, and you tried to stretch it. And Photoshop said, if you want it to be 6 times bigger, I have to create 6 times more pixels than ever existed. And it does as good a job as it can. The less information it has, the worse job it's going to do. Now, a vector, on the other hand, which is the bottom one here, look, there's my vector. Yep, is the bottom. The top one is my raster. Right now, at this point, it doesn't really matter. Vector is made out of, is just math. What it is we have mathematical shapes. This circle right here is a mathematical circle. It's made with what's called a Bezier curve. It uses Bezier curves and straight lines to make shapes. And then it says, fill that shape in with pixels, but don't worry about every single pixel. Just make every pixel inside the shape the same hue, the same saturation, and the same luminance. And it says, that's all you do, fill it in. Well, and it uses math to make those shapes. If you're following along here now, all of this stuff, you can't see any difference right now. But the problem comes in when, let's go Control-Alt-I, which says we're going to make this bigger. Right now, this is only 6 inches square at a resolution of 300 pixels per inch. So effectively at 300 dots per inch, I can only print this thing 6 inches square. I want to put it on a banner. So this is going to go for a company banner, and I want to make this like 26 inches. I'm going to say, okay, make it bigger, Photoshop. And Photoshop's going to start going to work, and it's going to figure out how to make it bigger. The vector, it's going to use math, and it's going to say, make these shapes bigger and use math to just make them bigger. Use bigger numbers. The raster image, it's saying, you know what, I'm going to interpolate. I'm going to have to create some pixels. So let's look at it full fit screen, and you're going to say, well, you haven't been seeing any of this, have you? I've not gotten it there. Hopefully you guys were clicked on there. There we go. Hopefully this is what you're saying. So what happens now, look what happens when I zoom in. If I zoom in, I never remember which one's which. Here's my raster is up top here. If I zoom in on my raster, you're going to start seeing some things. Remember, it took like 8 pixels to make that transition. Now look at how bad that's starting to look. See, now it's taken a whole bunch, 20, 30, 40 pixels to make that gradient. The bigger I make it, the worse it's going to look. Let's zoom out here. And now let's zoom in on our vector. You know, our vector was just math. All it did was say, make these same shapes, just use bigger math numbers to make the shapes bigger, fill them all in. So I can make this as big as a building, and it's still going to look as sharp as it did in the beginning. So let's back that off there. That's the difference between a vector and a raster. You need to understand that, because when we start moving into the toolbar, you'll notice on my left-hand side, I have all these tools, but then suddenly when I get down to this crazy looking pen tool, I have the pen tool, the type tool, I have my path selection tool, and then I have a custom shape tool. These 4 tools are the only vector tools that we have inside of Photoshop. If you want to make logos, don't use Photoshop. Learn to use Illustrator. Photoshop has 4 vector tools, and it has hundreds of raster tools. Illustrator has about a dozen or so raster tools, but it has hundreds of vector tools. So That's the difference between a vector and a raster. When it says by nature, text is probably why you're having that problem. Text by nature is going to be, see, it's down here. I said the pen tool, the text tool, these four are vector tools. The text is a vector to begin with. It's mathematical shapes. If you've put a text into anything, it's automatically going to go on its own layer because it's a vector. A vector and a raster are two different animals. They can't be in the same pin, so it goes on its own layer. And if I try to apply any type of photo filter to it, it says, just warning you, you're going to have to rasterize this. And what does it mean? It means that that text will no longer be scalable by math. It is going to be scalable by interpolation. So just be aware that when you rasterize something and you want to make it bigger, you're going to have some problems possibly. You know, if it's just tiny amounts, you probably can get by. But that's the difference between a vector and a raster. No reason to not know those things. So that's plenty tonight.
Hey,
We're going
Mark,
to set a date. Yes.
just want to add one thing.
Yeah.
Be careful when you're checking out fonts. You can go to 1001fonts.com and all these different websites. A true type font is going to be vectorized font. But there's other font types that are not vectorized, they're actually bits. And so when you go to scale them up, they can only go so far because the bit values only go maybe to say 100 instead of all the way up to 2,000, which you might need for a billboard or something. So
Good.
Be careful on that.
Yeah, so you heard that. It's just true type fonts are the ones that are actual vectors. The other ones, they're bitmaps, which a raster is a bitmap. It's just how much information that's there. So that's great information. Anything else to add, Dan?
Nope. Sounds good.
We will tell you when the next class will be. And again, tonight was getting our feet wet. Hopefully it went well for all of you. We will let you know ahead of time when we're going to be teaching the next one. We'll be moving into Photoshop. So that was Bridge in a nutshell tonight. There's other things that it does. Again, I'd like to hear what else you're using Bridge for. At some point, we're going to work through a workflow with you and show you how I use Bridge and Dan uses Bridge for different photo shoots for weddings that we can do a lot of times with Bridge and Camera Raw. Anything from 50 to 80% of our editing is done right there. We don't even go into the Photoshop environment. Only the ones that we're getting ready for print. So it is a powerful tool. It's a tool you need to embrace. It's a tool that you need to use. And we will be looking at Photoshop next time. So we thank you for your time and we look forward to working with you again with Photoshop. Thank you and good night.